Hello, and welcome to Get Recc'd. I am your host, Stephen Falgu.
And I am your other host, Louis Falgu. Get Recc'd is our occasional podcast where Stephen and I, two siblings, get together and recommend pieces of media to each other at the end of each episode, and then come back the next time and discuss those recommendations. But today, that is not what we're doing. We are following up from our first ever bonus episode, where we reviewed the cultural event, cinematic event, The Last Jedi, Star Wars The Last Jedi, in case you didn't know it was a Star Wars film, because, I don't know. And now we are following up and reviewing the sequel, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and I'm very excited. I don't know about you, but it's clearly a major event.
Yes, I know the fans have been asking for this
Oh, yeah.
for decades.
Yeah, specifically this film, but then also our review of the film.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Ever since 1977, they were like, man, I can't wait till episode 9, and then when Get Recc'd talks about it.
Yeah. Which a lot of people were making some pretty incredible predictions back then. I don't know what was up with that, but I don't know what we've lost as a society since then. I'm just going to go ahead and flash it up on screen now, I guess. The spoiler tag's up the whole time because we're just going to get into it. And I feel like talking about this movie, I don't even know how you don't spoil it, so...
Yeah, pretty much this whole movie is a spoiler fest. I don't think you could talk about it without spoiling even a single second.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it
because
and
honestly,
don't watch.
Honestly, I don't think we could talk about the movie like one of the biggest spoilers of the movie happens literally in the first second of the film.
Yeah,
so.
The title crawl. Yeah, the first second. A long time ago.
Yeah, when it says Lucasfilm,
yeah.
It's like, oh, what?
Yeah. So where do we even start?
So Louis, I think let's start with this. Okay, so this is our bonus episode. As you mentioned, one of our first bonus episodes, or our first bonus episode, was talking about The Last Jedi, a film that you and I both enjoyed, a film that's quite divisive on the internet. But I think we should just get that out of the way before we start talking about this one, because I think that really sets a precedent for what this film ultimately became. Essentially, The Last Jedi was divisive among fans and had a lot of really terrible vitriol across the internet. Was very... You could tell that there were a lot of reactions generated because of that movie, both in the short term, in online reactions, but then even going further into the future, coming to this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at the time that we talked about it, I remember it was pretty instantaneous that people were pissed about that movie, but that ball definitely kept rolling past the time when we made our video. It became...
And what's funny, Louis, sorry to interrupt, but what's funny, Louis, is if you remember from that episode, we talked quite a lot about all of the fan reaction coming out of Force Awakens. So it's not like this is the first time.
It wasn't, no. But it was definitely like... It got really insane. And I feel like it became a telephone game at a certain point, where it was like all of that snowballed into The Last Jedi just being accepted as like the worst Star Wars movie ever or something. And I feel like we would be, or I would be anyway, hard pressed not to mention that a ton of that vitriol was very, very reactionary and hopefully regrettable on the part of a lot of people, but I don't think they regret it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences to me looking back is where Force Awakens had a lot of opinion that I feel like was fair. I mean, J.J. Abrams came out the gate with a movie that ultimately, from a plot standpoint, played it very safe. I mean, you can still look at Force Awakens and it's still pretty much beat for beat A New Hope, but there were a lot of things that you and I talked about in our enjoyment of Force Awakens that I feel like differed. Once it got to The Last Jedi, I feel like Rian Johnson really tried to do something quite different, almost literally from the very first minutes of the film. And a lot of people did not like that. And now I know a lot of people didn't like Force Awakens because it was so similar. A lot more people disliked Last Jedi because it was so different in a way that many Star Wars fans believe to ruin classic characters. And as you mentioned, that kind of snowballed into this, honestly, probably one of the most polarizing films I've ever seen from the internet. I mean, now the internet hasn't been around forever, so this is something that's kind of new, but Twitter was, you either love the movie unconditionally and would fight anyone who said otherwise, or you hated the movie unconditionally and would fight anyone. There were really, or I should say, there was no middle ground that spoke up enough to make a
Yeah.
point.
I think it's worth noting right now, just because, just for the sake of some kind of good faith, I guess, that, like, the actual validity of the criticisms of that film obviously range, and there were plenty of things that you could not like about that movie, and it's okay. I think that the narrative that Steven kind of pushed there, I ultimately agree with on the broad scale, in the sense that, people like to talk about how fandoms want things to be the same but different. And you see that on a wide scale every time, and it definitely happened there too. But I don't think either of us are trying to say that if you don't like The Last Jedi, you just didn't like it because it was different. Okay, so it's okay. All right, you're safe. Okay. And anyway, you can watch our video on that, I guess, if you're really so inclined. But I think we've probably laid the groundwork enough, right? Rise of Skywalker comes out, 2 years later. And now, I guess, Disney, the directors, whoever, has to reckon with the fact that their trilogy, at this point, is seen in the eyes of many a Star Wars fan as an absolute disgrace. That it's worse than or at least it makes the prequels look good, and so on and so forth. And so you have to raise the question, how are they going to respond to that? How are they going to create a final film to satisfy everybody, in their eyes anyway? And this is how they did it.
Yeah, and one last thing to note before we start talking about the film is, I think it's fair to say that this film, this one specifically, the ninth one, has had some rocky starts, let's put it that way. And I wouldn't say it's just episode 9. Star Wars as a whole, I would say, starting from maybe Solo and to whatever the future will become, has been quite rocky. Essentially, people get hired on and get fired off almost immediately once they, who knows what goes on behind the scenes, to be honest. I know there's a lot of speculation out there, but all that is to say, we do know for a fact Colin Trevorrow was helmed. Colin Trevorrow, the director, probably best known for Jurassic World, was helmed to write and direct this film, but ultimately got canned from doing both. J.J. Abrams, who wrote and directed Force Awakens, not exclusively wrote, but for the most part wrote and directed Force Awakens, was brought back on to kind of pick up the mantle for episode 9. And there were a lot of shoots and reshoots, which isn't anything necessarily that's out of the ordinary for a film, but it was suggested that those shoots and reshoots were happening all the way up until basically release date, which again can happen. But I think all that is just to say that this film always was a little tumultuous and had a little bit of turmoil even from the get-go, pretty much right after Last Jedi.
Yeah. And I think, like, it really puts the entire trilogy into question. Can we first off just make it clear that neither of us liked this film, right? So I understand that the reception of this movie has been not polarized, but it's not positive either. It doesn't feel like The Last Jedi, where the movie came out and everybody just collectively shit the bed. It was more like everyone was just, like, tired of it at this point, I guess, and just kind of had to accept this movie wasn't going to be very good. But if you did like The Last Jedi, then it was just kind of like a massive disappointment. But I don't know if anybody's, like, well, I guess Last Jedi fans are probably pissed off about the movie, but like, you know, that subset isn't terribly vocal. I feel like it's just like I don't really know from what angle you can even like begin to dissect like all of the mistakes that were made here. I mean, it's kind of the movie is almost methodical in the way it just erases the last movie, like, as much as it can. And I say that because it has to acknowledge certain things. Like, you have to acknowledge that Luke is dead, you know. You have to acknowledge that Snoke is dead, you know. There's, like, certain things like that you have to acknowledge. But character arcs, major plot reveals, and so on and so forth just got unwritten, basically, in this movie. On a really consistent level that just kind of, like, seems to intentionally undermine everything that Rian Johnson did.
Yeah, and I think that there are quite a number of examples of that, but probably the most obvious example is Rose. The character of Rose Tico gets written out so hard that it's so noticeable. She just completely gets put on the bench. Her character role in Last Jedi is essentially rewritten for a different character, which honestly doesn't make any sense. And there are so many little moments too. If you take, that's kind of like the grand scale one, and then obviously there's a thematic shift in this movie too that I'm sure we'll talk about. But even on a small scale, like one thing fans really didn't like was the so-called Holdo maneuver, which I think was one of the most powerful scenes in Last Jedi, where essentially the Holdo character hyperdrives through Snoke's ship. Well, in this movie, they specifically say, oh, well, we can just use the Holdo maneuver. And they essentially like write it off. They tell that character, oh, no, we can't do that anymore. It's not safe. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, there are so many little moments like that, or bigger moments like that, where it's so obvious that a lot of that backlash from Last Jedi is rewritten or transformed to fit into a different narrative.
I think the most frustrating and also the least innocuous thing, I mean, aside from Rose, which I have words about, but aside from that, is that the theme of The Last Jedi, or you could say the point of The Last Jedi, was that anybody is capable of being a hero. Your destiny or your perceived destiny, your bloodline does not define you. It was legitimately a message of inclusivity. You know, in a vision of Star Wars that has become more diverse in terms of the cast, but with that film, it wasn't just the cast; it was thematically as well. That was the entire point of the movie. Like I mean, I guess you could also argue like failure was learning from failure was a major theme. And if you want to separate the message about like self-sacrifice and its futility from the message about being a hero, I guess you could do that too. But I feel like they're kind of intertwined. But that was what the movie ultimately built up to. That was what many of its major plot reveals were designed to say. And this movie just tosses it aside and rewrites it. Now Rey, hey guys, you know you guys who said Mary Sue. Rey was a Mary Sue. Well, you know, here you go. We'll give you a cookie because it turns out that she was really that powerful all along because she's connected to the most powerful man in the universe. Oh my god. Which, like, the more I think about that, the more that bugs the hell out of me. But also, it's like, again, plot-wise, The Last Jedi really just whittled down the cast. It had everybody set back, or most people set back anyway. And so, really, it was about furthering people's character arcs. And this movie tosses it away, which means that all of the people who said The Last Jedi was a pointless film, and those people were wrong, they are now right. It was pointless. It was completely pointless. And not only that, but I don't even... At no point in this movie does it even seem to acknowledge that, like, the rebellion is whittled down to a tiny number, which was one of the major things that happened plot-wise in The Last Jedi. That's not even a thing in this movie.
Yeah, they literally fit into a ship. The entire resistance fit into one ship in the end of the last movie, and that's not even close. Now, I guess you could kind of make an argument that they're still needing allies from around the galaxy, because I believe this movie is supposed to, from what I've heard, it's supposed to be set a year after the end of Last Jedi. So I guess you could make an argument that in that time frame they were able to get some allies, but ultimately you're right. It's like that probably would have been a bigger hurdle than just us having to fill in the gap there.
Yeah, or like having a spy having to give you something once or twice or something. Which, I mean, you might have needed anyway. So, yeah, and I mean, and to further this point as well, I guess something I was talking about with what you said about Rose, that is probably the most angering thing they did, because, like, you know, so people didn't like Rose for whatever reasons. And a subset of these people decided to launch a targeted harassment campaign on Kelly Marie Tran, bullying her off of social media. And then she said that she was hoping for, in this new movie, to like have a scene with Rose and Rey and everything. And they just told her to go fuck herself and gave her, like, what, 3 scenes? Well, no, sorry. They didn't give her scenes. They put her in, like, 3 scenes. So she could kind of say something. Even the whole, like, bond between her and Finn is, like, kind of just lightly acknowledged. Like, what, Finn literally, like, pats her on the shoulder? Like, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And it's just, I'm sure it's the person who it's the most frustrating to is her. But it's annoying too, because it's another way in which The Last Jedi just gets unwritten, in the sense that Rose, who was added, who was a main character, just doesn't matter anymore, just because people didn't like her.
Yeah, generally this film asks the audience to fill in a lot of gaps to a degree that I guess is not necessarily different than past Star Wars films, but it's much more extreme and egregious. Because if you remember, the other thing about the end of Last Jedi is Rose is in a coma. And that's... So what happened? She wakes up and Finn was like, thank you. Okay, bye.
She lost her memory, and now no one remembers that.
Everyone was trying to pretend had amnesia.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are just a lot of things here, like, just looking from a broad context, like, outside the scope of the film, like you mentioned, with Kelly Marie Tran's character, with Rey ultimately being someone who is connected to a powerful family, to rewrite some of that stuff. It not only sets a bad message based on the message of the previous film, the thematic message of the previous film, but it sets a bad message for all of the worst, absolute worst parts of a fandom, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the worst parts as well of the backlash towards The Last Jedi, you know. Coincidentally, it seems like all of the things they unwrote seem to be to please the reactionaries who hated the movie for reactionary reasons. I mean, I understand that, you know, a lot of people were disappointed that Rey didn't have a family, not because they don't believe a woman can be strong on her own, although maybe subconsciously. But, you know, even then, like, people have been hating Rey since The Force Awakens for being a Mary Sue in ways that they never... For leaps of logic those movies did admittedly have, that people never cared about when they happened to the men in, like, the original trilogy. I mean, because there were definitely leaps of logic there, too. I mean, like, these people are, like, magical space wizards. I mean, I don't know, like... Anyway, maybe I'm getting preachy, but the point is that, like, You're right. It definitely sets a bad message because I think all of the messaging that Rian Johnson pushed in the last film was incredibly positive, at least as far as I'm aware. And at least it definitely seems that way. And yeah, it's just like a lot of the things they decided to unwrite are like, it's just like, did you really want to go there? I don't know.
Yeah, well, what's so interesting to me is it feels like so Ryan Johnson really, I believe anyway, progressed all of those characters' arcs in an interesting way, top to bottom. Now, you can say what you want about the classic trilogy characters. I know that's where a lot of people were angry. But if you're looking at specifically the sequel trilogy characters, which really these films should focus on, it is their trilogy. I feel like he took all the pieces on the chessboard and moved them in such a way that made sense and allowed them to progress into a natural conclusion. It feels like JJ and their co-writer essentially took those components and threw them in the trash in a way that almost in some ways feels like a I don't know how I would say, like, in a revenge. Like, oh, I don't like where you took these characters, so I'm gonna start from zero. But the thing is, it's like JJ created these characters, except for Rose, obviously. But all of these core characters that are on the board for JJ and his co-writer to progress from what happens in The Last Jedi, it's like that doesn't even matter. It's like even I don't even think you could go from Force Awakens to Rise of Skywalker, cut Last Jedi out, and have the character arcs be a natural progression.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think the one who gets hit the hardest, honestly, is Finn. Like, John Boyega gets sidelined so hard. You can maybe make an argument even in Last Jedi, he kind of succumb to like a B plot. Although I think a very interesting B plot that progresses Finn's character from this selfish stormtrooper who really only exists in the Resistance because of his kinship with Rey and a little bit with Poe, to someone who progresses into someone who understands that there's more to fight for.
Yeah.
And then he gets sidelined into this film in this role where he basically is just like attached at the hip to Rey, who cares not for him at all. Like, really, I don't feel like any of the three main characters care for each other at all in this film. And Finn specifically just shouts Rey so much and does pretty much nothing else. In fact, Finn is so bad at what he does that he sees a ship literally like 30 feet away from him that he believes Chewbacca to have been in. First of all, this scene is a lot to unpack, but he sees a ship that he believes Chewbacca to have been in, and he was just wrong about that. Like, he just did that bad.
Yeah. But it's okay, because of his fuck-up, Chewbacca didn't die.
Which, this whole thing is just a mess.
I don't even, like... I want to say something real quick, and we can get right back to trashing all these things, because I think this movie is conceptually god-awful. I think it plays out passably, in the sense that I've seen this movie twice now, and honestly, most of this movie is a relatively fun time. I think J.J. Abrams is a very competent director at directing something like this. He proved that in The Force Awakens, and I think a lot of that prowess carries over in some scenes of this film. It's just that nothing is allowed to sit, so you'll end up in these pretty cool worlds with some pretty cool background events going on, and you'll be in and out like that. I mean, you know, maybe you'll get like one action scene, one plot event, and then see ya. So you kind of go on these like space adventures, and look, I think a lot of this stuff in the movie works just because, and this has always been the case, like, the main core cast of this sequel trilogy has so much chemistry together. It's probably the one thing that The Last Jedi was lacking, and not in that it made The Last Jedi worse, but it wasn't there because all of the characters were separated. And it's one thing that you want to see come back together in the final installment, is to see the characters who were together in the first film be together in the last film with their newfound arcs intact. Of course, that latter part is missing, but they are back together. I think they're a lot of fun together, although it is definitely true that you've basically just got Rey and then supporting characters. You know, Or maybe even Poe seems to be more of a major character here than Finn. He's really a supporting character in this film, a lot of the time. But Poe as well. And again, so I think a lot of this movie is carried by that. There are some compelling scenes, I think, every now and again, which we can get to. But the only reason I say all of this is because inevitably, in doing a review of this movie, all I can talk about is all of the things I've been thinking about relating to this movie conceptually. And also, most importantly, what it means for the trilogy. You know, a lot of people complain about The Last Jedi for being Rian Johnson just attempting to completely tear apart this trilogy. And in some ways, that's kind of true, but not in the way that people framed it. It wasn't like Rian Johnson showed up and was like, I hate this, and then made The Rise of Skywalker. Like that, you know? Like he made a movie that followed those plot threads, carried them through in ways that J.J. Abrams probably didn't intend, the other writers probably did not intend, and set up a new direction that you would not have thought the film would have gone in from ending The Force Awakens. But I mean, you know, ultimately you could say Empire did the same thing to the original trilogy. And now, you know, it's not like there weren't threads to carry through and work with. They just weren't worked with. They were just ripped to shreds, and it's just like course correction mode. And I don't see why on in terms of like a trilogy. Like, imagine sitting down and watching this trilogy. It would be the most unsatisfying, like, even if you like this movie, like, so many things that the entire second film builds up just don't matter. So it's like, why did I even, you know, why was this even a trilogy then? Why weren't they just like 3 standalone movies for the directors to do whatever the hell they wanted with? I don't even know.
Yeah, and what's weird about it is, like, first of all, that sucks, right? Because it's Last Jedi. You and I both enjoy that movie.
I like it more with time, by the way. That film is incredible. Like,
yeah. So the thing about it is, like, okay, so that sucks. So say this would hold true or hold better if you cut that second movie out. I don't even think you could do that.
Nope.
I think that's the thing about The Rise of Skywalker. If you went from Force Awakens to Rise, you'd be like, what? Like, none of the character arcs make sense. Like, the connections don't really make sense. The hole would be so big, and it's not like that hole was even set up in The Force Awakens. And that hole I'm talking about is the freaking Emperor returning, which honestly, to me, is the worst event. Because I want to talk about something quickly, and maybe we can dive deep into this now or later, but a lot of people were really angry at The Last Jedi because of what Rian Johnson did with the original characters. And I can see that. I can understand that, especially if you love those characters so much. I think that they were an incredible foil to the sequel characters, and I think that they even had really great ends to their arcs in that film. But I don't know how you could not say that about what this movie did by bringing the Emperor back. Because truly, honestly, and maybe you could say this about the entire sequel trilogy of films, but the Emperor coming back completely invalidates Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader's redemption arc. Darth Vader literally now did nothing. Like, that whole redemption from the prequels to the original trilogy literally now is for naught, because he didn't do anything, because actually the Emperor was alive the whole time. He threw him down a shaft and he lived.
Or he was cloned. Remember that? They don't know.
Dark magic.
But either way, it doesn't make a difference. It's the same thing. Yeah. I mean, and also, it's also really frustrating because, like, you already have the sequel trilogy where, you know, that whole the defeat of the Empire, eventually a First Order rises and it all happens over again. And I think you have to be fine with that because we live in a actual real world where that happens all the time and is happening again. And, like, so you have to accept that, especially considering that, you know, the Star Wars films were always made to mirror real life fascist movements. Like, that's what the entire empire was. It was so that you had, like, oh, here's an obvious bad guy, right? And now, with this trilogy, you have Kylo Ren, who's a little less obvious because he's exactly the kind of person who could get sucked in to these kinds of movements, and you don't know what's going to end up with him. So that's interesting. But when you take... But yes, what does invalidate what Darth Vader did is to literally bring back the person that he killed. You didn't need to do that. Like, you can have shit get bad again without the guy who made it bad the last time being the same exact person who made it bad again, apparently. Because according to Palpatine, and this makes no sense, by the way. It makes literally no sense. But Palpatine had this mastermind plan from the very beginning to make the events unfold in this specific way so that Rey would kill him and become the heir to his throne. It is the most... It's just the most convoluted plan. Even if you take away all the ways in which it just doesn't even work or make sense in the context of the trilogy, let's imagine that it were completely consistent. This is still the most convoluted plan you could possibly have. Like,
yeah, so I just imagine, okay, so you have Sheev Palpatine. He's on Naboo. He's just killed Darth Plagueis, right? And he's like, okay, now to craft my master work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a war between the Republic and a different shadow faction to become the Emperor. Then, once I'm the Emperor, I will find a protege who will kill me, but he won't kill me in time for me to have a son. And that son will have a daughter, who then I'll come back to life. I'll create a creepy-looking old guy to get my son's son-in-law son to align with, who will bring my daughter or my granddaughter to me, who will then kill me.
Yeah. And if she doesn't kill me, it doesn't even matter, because I'll suck the life force out of her and be evil anyway. I mean...
See, I think, but the other thing I think is, it's like, okay, so if you're going to do this, I do think there's something interesting to say if Ben Solo has a bigger role to play in all of this, because there is something thematic about him continually saying he wants to finish what his grandfather started. And okay, that could be interesting, because then he becomes this nice foil to Rey, and them together can defeat the Emperor, which would ultimately 100% without a doubt, at least to our knowledge right now, kind of close a chapter on not only like the whole Skywalker lineage, right? Like, Darth Vader tried to kill the Emperor, maybe didn't succeed, and the Emperor comes back, but now it's like the next generation is able to continue this hope, right? But they didn't even really do that. I mean, Ben Solo becomes quote unquote redeemed, which for me is just a generally iffy kind of like scene.
It's
honestly.
questionable.
It's questionable to me, but he becomes redeemed, and then he really has no part to play in the final showdown. In fact, I would argue he does almost nothing. He defeats the Knights of Ren, who we didn't even know were there. Then he comes to Rey. The Emperor sucks his life force and like pushes him off a cliff, and like that's it, really. I mean, his part to play was he brings Rey back to life and then becomes a Force ghost.
Yeah, although really, if Rey died or lived, it wouldn't have really had an effect on whether Palpatine was dead. So, I guess he did it for the audience. I don't know. It's just like, it's the weirdest way. I don't know. Was it even an attempt to retcon The Last Jedi? Like, I don't even know. It seems like it was, because connecting her to Palpatine, you know, undoes the whole "you're a nobody" thing, which, by the way, is so much more interesting. Like, do we need to... I don't know why we want to keep seeing a family lineage keep being, like, the heroes that dominate all the fucking time. That consider how much cooler of a concept it is to have Rey, a nobody, become the hero of the universe through sheer force of will, like, and overcome her lack of background, her lack of understanding about herself. That's interesting, but that's not what happened. What happened is Rey Palpatine killed her grandfather. I don't give a shit. Like, it's also, by the way, I feel like it makes Kylo Ren just feel like such a smaller piece of this whole trilogy now, too. Like, he basically just ended up being a pawn in Palpatine's chess game. But it's like, it's not like in the original trilogy when we knew that that's what was going on. So we set up Kylo Ren as like, you know, he had an emperor in Snoke at one point. But we set up Kylo Ren in the second film as like, holy shit, like this is the guy who is literally rising space fascism, I don't know, 6.0 or whatever. And like, and now it's like, nope, he's just the guy who's gonna realize the error of his ways and take down the real bad guy. I don't know what's interesting about that. Like, it's not even fun to watch, by the way, because that entire sequence of events, pretty much the moment it cuts to all the Star Destroyers in space to the end of this movie, is just terrible. It's just so drab and ugly and just, like, predictable. Not to mention the fact that the actual scene just completely flatly mirrors the scene that from, Return of the Jedi anyway, right down to him opening a window and showing her that her friends are gonna die, you know, like, this is literally the most basic thing you could have done, is just have the big bad guy and the good guy and then the bad good guy now. It's not, this already happened.
Yeah, and I feel like it even undermines a theme of Force Awakens, too. Like, obviously, even from the title, the idea is that there's this new awakening in the Force. But actually, no, there really isn't a new awakening in the Force. It's just the granddaughter of Palpatine finally found a lightsaber, I guess.
That would be a good subtitle for that movie. Star Wars, the granddaughter of Palpatine finds a lightsaber. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, and it is... Whatever, but... yeah, I don't know. I guess, and it's also funny because the movie kind of like bakes in the assumption that Palpatine's just been there the whole time, and we're like not supposed to question how obviously stupid that is. Like the opening title crawl, Palpatine is back, and it's just like, wait, what? And that's all the explanation you need. I mean, all the other explanation is like vague stuff like, oh, they've had cloning and dark magic or something, but they don't even say that that's like actually what happened. You kind of just left to guess. And, like, this is a pretty big deal. Like, and they don't even treat it like it is. I mean...
Yeah, the thing about this movie is, like, that's one of my biggest problems with it. Is, like, they don't treat anything like anything is anything. Like, Rey doesn't ever tackle the fact that she's the granddaughter of Palpatine. Like, when she finds Palpatine, it's not like, oh my god, like, you're one of the strongest people in the universe, and we have a kinship, and I have to deal with that. It's just kind of like... hey, kill me.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay.
and oh my god, and by the way...
And there's so many reveals, right? Like, when she, quote-unquote, kills Chewbacca, like, that should be a big deal to everyone involved. And it's like, nah.
Yeah, Finn screams, and then it's just a bunch of scenes where they're saying, he shouldn't have died for nothing. And it's like, oh.
Right. But it's not like he died for nothing. It's like, hey, Rey, your friend, killed him.
Yeah.
And no one really tackles with that at all.
And I yeah, okay. So, back to the Palpatine thing real quick, because something that really bugs me about it. You know, you do the whole, like, if you kill the evil genocidal fascist, then you'll be as bad as me thing, which is, you know. But I guess they did that in the original trilogy. But, like... It's so stupid because, like, I'm way past the point of buying this now, considering that in that exact same scene, we see Kylo Ren just murder a bunch of cronies. We just witnessed everybody murdering cronies the entire film without any thought. And, like, I mean, those people, you're killing them because they're a threat to you, right? Like, Palpatine is literally the greatest threat to you that there is. But the way they justify it is that if they kill him, he'll magically still exist. And then she kills him and he doesn't magically still exist. I don't even... I don't even know what this, like, what even was that solution supposed to be? Like, so if she hit him with the lightsaber, then he would have continued on. But if she hits him with his own lightning, then he's gonna go away forever. Yeah. Like, I don't,
now,
how does that even work?
Yeah, now it's technically suicide, so...
Yeah, if he kills himself, then
there
it's
are
really
a lot of things like that, though, like a lot of technicalities. Like, my favorite is when they're like, basically a wink to the camera. They're like, "Hey, we didn't lie to you about your parents being nobodies.
Oh my god!
But your granddad, we never said anything about that."
Yeah.
And then my favorite line: "They sold you to protect you."
Yeah, nice.
Which is like, what?
I can't. Yeah. And also, you have to figure if Palpatine is this genius mastermind, it seems like he would have been able to get his hands on Rey a long time ago, right? Like,
yeah, like he knew where she was. It's not like
see, the thing is, a lot of this, none of this is nitpicking. First of all, because these are like actually plot destroying. The entire point, the entire like main plot line of this film just does not make sense. It just doesn't make sense, and that's like, again, this isn't an isolated thing. This is supposed to close out an entire trilogy, so if the story of the final film makes no sense, it then ends up erasing the last two, and now they don't make sense. Because we're supposed to assume, now I guess, while watching those two movies, that Palpatine is the one pulling all the strings. And it just ruins it. Like, it actually just, if you watch the movies thinking that, it'll just kill everything. Nothing matters when you know that. And like,
yeah, there's literally zero indication.
Oh yeah,
of that too, which we talked about. But like, even going back to Force Awakens, it's like, okay, so they figure out Rey exists, and they try to hunt her down. In the second one, Snoke wants Kylo to bring Rey to him, and then have Kylo kill him. And then now in the third one, it was like, oh, no, actually, I wanted you to come to me, the Emperor, even though I was puppeteering Snoke? Or I was Snoke?
No, he literally made Snoke. Remember? Snoke? He was making more Snokes. They're in a test tube.
Yeah, I know. But, like, was he puppeteering them? Or, like, what was going on?
I don't even. He was an animatronic AI machine that was programmed to somehow lead Rey to the Emperor in the most convoluted way possible. I don't know. I mean, I really don't think we can overstate this, because I feel like a lot, like, most of where this film just fails conceptually is all tied to the fact that they brought Palpatine back. It just doesn't add up. And then you couple that with all the other things this trilogy has to reckon with, and this movie really feels messy. It feels really messy. Like, there's a substantial part of this movie where I feel like characters are barely even acknowledging that Palpatine's there, even though they all know for most of the movie. It kind of just gets away from that for a long time. And then, you know, we have some stuff where Rey's, like, questioning if she's on the dark side, which we already saw that in the last movie. I mean, I'm fine with it carrying over, but, like, there's a literal fucking scene in this movie where Rey sees an evil version of herself, and the evil version of herself has fangs. that happens in this movie. It's like, you know, we're really subtle now, you know? We're really exploring the depths of Rey's, it's like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there's just, it's a lot. And tracking it across the entire film, the other thing is, it's like, because you're not allowed to sit and really take in any of the moments, it all progresses so quickly, too. And then it slows down to a screeching halt for the climax of this film.
Oh, yeah, which is just dreadful, by the way. I mean, I already said that, but God, that climax is just mind-numbing. It's like, the Emperor, we literally have a scene where the Emperor shoots a laser into the sky. I mean, like, can you not do that? Is it too much to ask movies to not do that? Well, there was a laser in the sky in Force Awakens too, wasn't there? Or at some point, probably. I don't know.
Yeah, when I mean, we can't pass up the opportunity to mention that there's not one planet destroyer. There's a fleet
Oh
of
yeah,
planet destroyers.
because the Emperor's Star Destroyers that he raised out of the ground also can destroy planets now, because the stakes just need to be that high, as if that makes it any more exciting. It actually just makes it more boring. I mean...
But yeah, there is a giant laser. It comes from the planet destroyer in Force Awakens.
That's right, yeah. Well, anyway.
So do you want to talk about things that we did enjoy, though?
Yes, I was just about to say. And I'll start with one thing that I want to mention. I really like what the movie does with C-3PO. I thought all that was super fun. I understand that... I don't remember the actor's name for C-3PO.
Anthony Daniels?
Anthony Daniels. I understand that he wanted C-3PO to have like an arc and be a hero in this movie, and they let him. And it sounds dumb and fan servicey, and it kind of is, but it was actually, it was nice. I think C-3PO tagging along with the group all this time is kind of inevitably fan servicey, I guess. So like, at least give him something to do, give him some kind of purpose, have him like, have a little arc in this movie, and I thought that was really nice that they did that.
Babu Frick. I like that little character.
Yeah, he's fun. That entire scene's pretty good. I feel like that entire scene on that planet. Well, and like, okay, as I'd said before, and I'm curious to see if you would agree with this, because I kept going afterwards. But like I said, would you agree with me that most of this movie is pretty fun? Like most of the runtime.
Yeah, I would say so.
I think there are some pretty decent action scenes. I think there are some cool environments they go to. I think the going place to place, meeting new characters, and finding new little traps to get stuck in or whatever is a fun diversion. I like how I have to undermine it by calling it that, but really, like, there's a lot more going on here that we're just ignoring when we do that. But whatever.
I do think that there are a lot of really fun live-action fan servicey elements. Now, I think a lot of them are over the top, but like the whole introductory scene of Rey in this movie, I do enjoy that quite a bit. She's running around. She does some things that we haven't seen on film before, like doing the lightsaber toss and the recatch. All that's pretty cool.
I think the movie, for the most part, looks good. They still do a nice balance of in fact, I think whatever CG was there seemed even minimized. I think, I don't remember her name, the small orange woman, Maz Kanata. I think, was she a practical effect in this film? Because it looked like she was not CG, like, because she looked pretty bad in Force Awakens. I liked the way she looked. And anyway, my point is generally, cinematography, all that stuff's pretty good. It's just that the editing is a lot quicker this time around, so you don't get to sink any of it in like you did in the last two movies, which just, by the way, look way more impressive. That being said, I think the movie looks nice. It's a vibrant film. There are cool planets, cool environments, cool sets. I like the scene where Rey and Kylo confront each other and have the fight. I like that entire scene. And then I especially like redoing the meeting between Kylo Ren and Han Solo, except like the exact same framing and blocking on screen, except that now instead of, killing Han Solo, he throws the lightsaber.
Yeah, I think that was done very well.
Mm-hmm. That was probably one of the more compelling scenes.
I do like their use of Carrie Fisher in this film. I think that she has a nice little arc here and a nice arc going back to between the three movies.
Yeah. Oh, and I mentioned this already, but I think the characters maintain a lot of chemistry. I think this movie is funnier than The Last Jedi. I think the quips in this movie are funnier, and they land a lot more often. So, yeah.
Always shout out to John Williams. Another great score, and then a lot of classics return for this film. And then, although we did talk about the Emperor returning, from a plot standpoint and plot contrivance, I think it's not great. But Ian McDiarmid, anytime he is playing that character, it is just such a treat to watch. He hams it up to the nth degree.
Yeah, so and,
just in general, I feel like, I will say this, what the actors were given, from what I can see on screen, I think that they all did a good job.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think necessarily anyone was written especially well, but from an acting standpoint, these are a really strong cast of characters, and even the classic characters returning all do their portrayals really great.
Yeah, I don't have any other positives to point out necessarily. I want to make it clear, though, that again, I think most of the movie being enjoyable is a big positive. It's just I can't call out a lot of specific things, but I do think the film has some fun stuff in it. I think it's an enjoyable watch for most of it. I just think that the more pernicious aspects, I guess, the more like insidious aspects, I guess, the conceptual elements here, like weigh this movie down a lot. That and also I would say, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but the first like 10 or 15 minutes of this movie is just like really bad. Like everything's just like moving at this ridiculous pace. We see the Millennium Falcon and they're just doing some shit, and it's like, what's going on? And like they're shooting, it's like, what's going on? And then they're light speed dashing through a bunch of environments, and then there's a monster, and I'm just like, what? And that was just not handled well. But so yeah,
and one of the other major problems I have with this film is I feel like a lot of this film is just straight exposition. Now, J.J. Abrams actually does some interesting things with that exposition, but it like is most pronounced in literally the opening scene of this film. Kylo finds the holocron, gets to the Emperor, and then it's just very dry exposition. And it's not the first time this happens either, where it's literally just like, to tell you information that you need to know. I'm not going to show it to you. I'm just going to tell it to you.
Yeah.
Happens in the very first scene where he meets the Emperor. That happens obviously when he's telling Rey who her parents are. Although again, I do think that they're shot well, so it's not necessarily dry, but from an actual plot purpose, it's just very straightforward exposition revealing information to pretty much only the viewer, honestly. And I feel like a lot of things in this movie do that. It's kind of like a wink to the audience in a way that is so pronounced that really, in the context of the universe and the plot, it doesn't really hold any meaning. And I think the one that is the most egregious example of this, and the one that I feel like people are talking about the most, is the very last scene of this film.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
I think in general, just talking about that scene in general, I think, first of all, that it's on Tatooine is just straight up like a wink to the audience. Like, who even is to say if Rey even knows was from Tatooine? Leia really didn't have any significance to that place. Luke really, you could even argue, did not have much significance to that place. He never returned there. He never wanted to return there. And she buries their lightsabers there, which, you know, I mean, from a gesture is a good gesture, I guess. But then obviously when she says, I'm Rey Skywalker, because some rando asks her who she is for some reason.
Yeah, and I don't even understand what the point of this is supposed to be.
I actually think it would have been so much more interesting if, you know, if you're going to set up that she's Rey Palpatine, I think it would have been so much more interesting for her to own that.
Yeah.
Like, take that name, which has so much significance to the entire galaxy for so long, and spin it, right? Like
reclaim it. Yeah.
Take that mantle and do something better with it. But instead, she calls herself Skywalker, which I would imagine to her the significance would be probably to Leia. But honestly, we don't have any indication that Leia ever called herself Skywalker. In fact, I would argue that she probably really doesn't like that name, to be honest. Like, her only connection to that family name in a positive way is Luke. Family name is Organa to her anyway. So would she have taken the name because of Luke? I would argue that her and Rey and Luke's relationship was actually quite contentious, and neither of them necessarily ever truly liked each other.
Well,
so it's just a very odd scene.
You know, she saw his ghost or whatever. I don't know. It is odd. But it's basically just to make people happy because they hear her say the Skywalker word. I mean, let's be real. Like, I don't know what significance it could have outside of that. It just, like, Like, is she saying to the audience, "Hey, I'm the good guy now"? Wink. I mean, I don't even like. I don't know. It's
Yeah, the other thing that I thought would have been much more interesting is instead, well, first of all, there's a ton of force healing in this movie to the point where, like, every time I've went to see it, my theater laughed in the very serious moment where Rey and Solo share a kiss and he dies.
Oh
Because
god.
honestly, it's kind of shot like a comedy.
Yeah, that
But
scene is bad.
even with that being said, I actually think it would have been so much more interesting if he had to actually atone as opposed to just dying as Darth Vader had before him. Like, if he had to actually atone for the galaxy, that would have been something different, but obviously they didn't go there. And that's okay. I mean, it is what it is. The last thing I wanted to mention, because I forgot to mention this in the things that I liked, I do like the one thing that I do feel like JJ and the writers took from Last Jedi and really expanded on was that Force connection relationship. They called it something silly, like a dyad in the Force or something, and who knows what that even means or whatever. But I do really feel like they progressed that in an interesting way, and specifically that shot counter shot a lot in Last Jedi. They took that to an even more extreme. So clearly, over this past year and in this film, they've kind of matured that, whatever that is, to the point where they're having these talking relationships and the environment interacts in these moments that they have together, and they use that in very interesting ways in this film.
I really like the scene where she's in his captain's area and he slashes the bucket of berries down on the ground, and then in the next shot the berries like splatter out onto the floor in the captain's quarters, but like from no object. That was a really cool shot. Really cool editing trick.
Yeah, and a lot of those moments are actually really cool.
Yeah. I don't know. It actually, it's funny when we go through the positives. They sound like really minor stuff compared to everything else. And that's again why I keep saying, like, it's conceptually, I think this movie fails the hardest, because actually watching it fails less hard. At least, like, I think it's a passably watchable movie. I don't think it's like a bad movie, honestly. Like, it's just like, it's definitely a bad cap on the trilogy. It's not a terrible movie though, but it also is definitely not a good movie. Like, it's a very cluttered, mistaken, unfortunate film in a lot of ways. And yes, it does feel a lot worse as a sequel to The Last Jedi as well. And I guess the finish of this sequel trilogy, which now, and I'm really sad to say this because I genuinely thought this sequel trilogy had a chance to be better than the original trilogy. Like, it legitimately did. Because I'm not crazy about Return of the Jedi. I'm not. And I feel like the way Rian Johnson set up a potential third film to start to branch off and do something new, this sequel trilogy could have turned into a fantastic trilogy. And they just flubbed it. Like, completely. I mean, at least Return of the Jedi has a really satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. This just doesn't. It's just nothing. It just doesn't matter. It makes everything feel pointless. Which sucks.
So I think we could probably just move on to our closing thoughts, Lewis.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can go first. I think, for me, I know we said at the top that we don't care for this movie, and that's true for me too. Although I wouldn't say that I necessarily hate it or anything. Like, it's definitely, as you mentioned, 100% watchable. I don't know how many times I would watch it again, but I'm such a big Star Wars fan that I pretty much watch them all the time. And I am excited to actually watch this in the context of the trilogy, like watch 7, 8, 9 back to back. Because I'm just excited to see how much of a backlash, like whiplash, that'll be.
Oh, God.
But with that being said, like, you know, I think it's okay. Like, if I were to give it a numeric score, I'd give it like basically right around a 5 or a 6, somewhere in there. Because there are actually some pretty standout moments but for the most part, just thematically, I don't enjoy the moral of this film. I don't enjoy a lot of the major plot elements that they introduce or expand on. And I just feel like a lot of it is so edited so quickly and so abruptly that characters don't have time to conclude their arc. The audience doesn't have time to reflect on significant events or really even gain anything other than basically a big fun action blockbuster, which I think it is. That, like, if you go into this film with that context, you will 100% get that out of this film, because it really does a good job at being that. But with that being said, I don't think I would recommend it, honestly. Like, I don't think I would tell people you have to go out and see this. I don't think that there's anyone who probably hasn't, like, is on the fence about going see a Star Wars movie. Like, if you're going to go see it, you're going to go see it. It's a big blockbuster. But that's kind of where I sit.
Yeah, I would also give the movie a 5. And I would mostly echo that. I think it's true that if you want a fun Star Wars film, you get that for the majority of this movie. I still think that the finale is god-awful. But a lot of people are more friendly to, like, ugly-ass color correction and giant action sequence with giant stakes than I am. I tend to get very bored. So maybe that's just me. But most of the film, pretty fun, directed pretty well, but it is a conceptual nightmare. And that's on both its own terms, but especially in the context of the trilogy. Which is why when it comes to recommending the movie, it's like, I don't know, because a lot of people haven't liked this trilogy anyway, and if you haven't liked this movie, or haven't liked this trilogy, I don't see why this one would win you over. I mean, apparently it won over Ben Shapiro, but that's probably just an advertisement to not go see it. So, okay, there's that, and then if you liked the trilogy so far, I really don't know if you'd be satisfied with this movie either. I guess some people will be. Maybe the people who would be most likely to enjoy this movie, by my calculation, would be people who liked The Force Awakens but didn't like The Last Jedi. I can imagine they might like this movie, but that's about it. And even then, I mean, that's a gamble. But yeah, Steven's right. I think I keep thinking myself into this hole that I hate this movie. I guess I hate what it did to the trilogy because I was a huge fan, but I don't actually hate the movie. I've seen it twice now, and I can conclude it's not bad. It's fine. I can watch it and not hate myself while watching it. That I guess that stands for something. But I guess
with that being said, I want to talk about two final things. One is, I would ask, do you want to tell our rankings now that the whole thing is over?
Sure, yeah, go for it.
Do you want to would you want to tell our rankings of just where we think the sequel trilogy fits?
We could do the whole thing. My ranking is subject
do you want to
change.
include? Did you see Solo?
No, I did. Can we just do the mainline films?
Okay, mainline films. So that's 9 episodes.
Yes.
I go right now.
Wait, best to worst. Best to worst or worst to best?
I'm going best to worst.
Okay.
So Empire Strikes Back. I'll say them by their name just so there's no confusion. Empire Strikes Back, Last Jedi, New Hope, Force Awakens, Return of the Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, Revenge of the Sith, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones.
Okay. And now mine's subject to change. I'm actually going to rewatch a couple of these movies. But I think I would go Empire Strikes Back, Last Jedi, Force Awakens, New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Revenge of the Sith. Return of the Jedi, Rise of Skywalker, then Revenge of the Sith. And I honestly can't decide between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. So they're equal at the bottom, I guess.
These are pretty much exactly the same.
They're pretty close. I think I think
go.
literally the only difference is that I like Force Awakens more than New Hope, but I'm not even sure about that. But maybe I'll update the Get Recc'd audience when I finally do these reviewings and say it at some point when it's not relevant anymore. But anyway.
And then the other thing, the final thing I want to end on, because this is something that came up recently. Lewis, I don't know if you've heard, but people are requesting and suggesting that J.J. Abrams, the evil Disney executives, and Kathleen Kennedy came to J.J. Abrams and said, J.J., you must cut this film down. And now the people are demanding
give us the J.J. Abrams cut. It doesn't even make sense. It's the stupidest theory. Do you actually think if you make this movie longer, it'd make it better? It's like when people said that like they needed the supercut of Batman v Superman. Why did you want that? I mean, and that's assuming it even exists. And I don't think there's any evidence. I don't think anyone's actually provided evidence that there's like a bigger cut that just happens to somehow make sense. Like what is the JJ cut? It just doesn't include Palpatine and it's a completely different film. I don't know.
I mean, the only thing I could say is if you have more time, at least hopefully in that edit, you would have time to sit on major events, but I highly doubt it.
Yeah. And again, I don't think it fixed very much. But with that said, release the JJ cut. Come on. I want to see the longer Rise of Skywalker. Rise of Skywalker, but longer. Oh, goody. Anyway.
All I hope is that the JJ cut, first of all, has more lens flare. That's very important.
Definitely.
Secondly, actually, all of the stuff that got edited out was another Star Trek film, and it just gets interstitched with this last Star Wars film.
Whoa.
And the fandoms come together, and everyone hugs, and that's the end of it.
Because that's what would happen.
She goes, I'm Rey. And everyone goes, what?
Whoa. Anyway. I guess that was our bonus episode, everyone. Listen on CastBox. Okay? You should do that. I recommend it.
And if you are Ray Picard, let us know in the comments.
Okay. I guess that's it, right? I guess we're done. That's it. We're done here. Okay. Well, with that, those were our thoughts. Those were our recommendations. Except not Get Recc'd.